This is part 3 of a 3-part video series covering the changes proposed under the Burlington Neighborhood Code. The Neighborhood Code is supported by a bylaw modernization grant from the Vermont Department of Housing and Community Development and in collaboration with and in-kind support from AARP Vermont's Livable Communities program. Part 2 of this video series covered the first 2 sets of recommendations, creating flexible dimensional standards and how we can move away from regulating buildings through density limits. This video will cover modifications to existing residential boundaries and districts. As mentioned in the last video, the Joint Committee met 9 times between October of 2023 and January of 2024 to review the recommendations within the Neighborhood Code. The Joint Committee discussed and modified the proposed changes to existing residential zoning district boundaries and the new residential corridor district. These changes will ultimately allow up to 4 or 6 units per building citywide, with differences between residential low and medium districts focused more on the allowable lot cover and number of units per building. Walkable core areas in the residential high and the new corridor zones will allow more flexibility in terms of housing type choice. Today, there are 5 residential zoning districts citywide, plus 2 overlay districts for sub-areas of these districts. These districts include residential low density, or RL, waterfront residential low density, or WRL, residential medium density, RM, waterfront residential medium density, or WRM, and residential high density, or RH. Specific neighborhoods in the RL districts are within a special zone with more restrictive development standards called the Residential Large Lot Overlay District. One of the goals of the Neighborhood Code's changes to residential districts aims to streamline existing zoning districts by combining waterfront low density and the residential low zone, and waterfront medium density and the residential medium zone. The primary difference between the regular residential and the waterfront residential districts are that the waterfront residential districts require a certain buffer from the waterfront as well as design review. Because these requirements are covered elsewhere in the city zoning ordinance and there is functionally no difference between these zones, the recommendation is to combine the waterfront low and waterfront medium districts with their base residential counterparts. The Neighborhood Code aims to establish more context-sensitive zoning standards, in part by better aligning zoning standards with what is built today. As discussed in part 1 of this video series, changes to zoning standards last century scaled back the housing types and housing diversity that used to be allowed and exists in many neighborhoods, including some of the most well-loved historic areas of the city. In some places, these changes to residential development standards has resulted in a mismatch between what exists on the ground in Burlington's neighborhoods and what is currently permitted to be built. This mismatch has created widespread nonconformities for existing homes and lots, in some cases impacting large areas of historic neighborhoods. While the city's zoning laws don't require nonconformities to be remedied immediately, these nonconformities create limits for how properties can evolve over time. This can impact the ability to create new homes in certain neighborhoods, as well as flexibility for how an existing home might evolve to meet the future needs of its occupants. This proposed map rezones 5 areas from RL to RM and 1 area from RM to RH to more closely align with what is on the ground and overcome barriers to facilitating more housing types. Outside of the changes to dimensional standards and the transition to move from density to massing standards discussed in part 2 of this video series, a major primary driver for conformity is the lot cover limits between residential low and residential medium. These 2 maps show how certain neighborhoods across the city are largely non-conforming due to existing lot cover limits. However, not all of these areas will see relief solely through the modest increases to lot cover limits proposed under the Neighborhood Code. An example for why, in addition to lot cover increases, certain areas are recommended to be rezoned can be seen in the easternmost half of the Old North End. The zoning in this area was changed in 1994 from residential medium to residential low. In part as a result of this change, today over 75% of parcels are above the RL zone's current 35% maximum lot cover. Even if this area retains its residential low district designation, over 65% of parcels will still surpass the proposed 45% maximum lot cover standard under the new RL rules. Ultimately, this area was recommended to be once again a residential medium district. If changed, this area would only have just over 30% of its parcels have a non-conforming lot coverage. The decision to rezone specific areas of the city was a major topic of conversation during the Joint Committee discussion and relied heavily on the data-driven approach taken from the start of this process. Areas recommended to remain as residential low are areas where at least half the lots are larger than 6,500 square feet and have an existing lot cover less than 45%. This is because the combination of lot size and lot coverage for these areas provides more room for new homes to be created under the Neighborhood Code. The committee recommended that neighborhoods where half or more of the lots were smaller than 6,500 square feet and have more than 45% lot cover, the limit in the proposed RL zone, be rezoned to RM. Note that some areas within the residential districts are already within the RM zone, such as the Old North and West, and others in the RH zone, including east of downtown. Based on key characteristics, including existing lot coverage and lot size, as well as how many properties in a particular area are nonconforming, the following areas are recommended to rezone from RL to RM. The Five Sisters neighborhood, the areas surrounding Hoover and Clymer, the easternmost half of the Old North End, from North Willard to Mansfield, Lakeside, and south of downtown from South Union to South Willard. The proposed map rezones other areas to advance planning goals to allow greater flexibility for housing types and intensity by creating a new corridor zone for properties currently zoned RL or RM that front on North Avenue, Colchester Avenue, Shelburne Road, and St. Paul Street from the roundabout to Kilburn Street. This district will regulate residential and some neighborhood supporting commercial uses along major street corridors adjacent to low-intensity zones. The establishment of a residential corridor zone would allow greater flexibility for housing types and intensity along major streets identified in Plan BTV, which are shown here. Recommendations for residential corridors are based on a variety of factors, including whether they were primarily in existing residential low or medium districts, how the street links the city's downtown core to other gateways into and out of Burlington, whether the streets continue to serve as main auto and transit lines, and are identified as major linkages and/or highest facility design in the walk-bike plan. Not all of the corridors from Plan BTV are included in the residential corridor district. This is primarily due to the other zoning districts applying along those corridors, such as the Neighborhood Activity Center zone applying along Riverside Avenue. In addition to establishing the corridor zone, other proposed changes include rezoning the Champlain Elementary property from residential low to residential medium. Minor changes to the zoning map also include the addition of 60 Austin Drive and a portion of 2076 North Avenue to the RL zone from adjacent non-residential districts. The changes to the residential districts map will ultimately allow up to 4 or 6 units per building citywide, with differences between residential low and residential medium districts focused more on the allowable lot cover and number of units per building. Walkable core areas in the residential high and the new corridor zones will allow more flexibility in terms of housing type choice. As mentioned at the start of this video, specific neighborhoods in the residential low districts are within a special zone with more restricted development standards called the Residential Large Lot Overlay District. This district was established in order to maintain a development pattern of larger residential lots than in the rest of the low-density area, requiring much larger lot dimensions and a much lower density limit than the existing low-density district. This density limit causes the overlay district to fall out of compliance with Act 47 that established that the density limits regulated by municipalities be no lower than 5 units per acre. When presented with options to either adjust standards to meet the minimum Act 47 requirements or to treat these areas like other residential low neighborhoods, the Joint Committee decided to eliminate the large lot overlay district in favor of utilizing base residential low standards. The final change to Article 4 zoning maps and districts is the recommendation to eliminate the RH High Density Bonus Overlay District, which today has no remaining utility, in favor of utilizing base RH standards. Thanks for watching Part 3 of our video series focused on the proposed neighborhood code. To view the first 2 parts of the series that focus on the purpose of this amendment and the proposed recommendations, or to read more about the neighborhood code, visit the Office of City Planning website.